In the scorching desert of Arizona, where the Sonoran winds whispered secrets through ancient saguaro cacti, lived a pig that everyone considered completely worthless. The animal belonged to Joseph Crow Feather, a 60-year-old Apache elder whose weathered hands had seen more hardship than most men could endure in 3 lifetimes. The reservation stretched endlessly around his modest trailer, a sea of red earth and scattered scrub brush that most outsiders dismissed as barren wasteland. But Joseph knew better. This land held stories, memories, and mysteries that ran deeper than the deepest well. The pig, which Joseph had named Diablo for reasons nobody quite understood, was unlike any swine anyone had ever encountered. Standing barely 2 feet tall with coarse black bristles and intelligent dark eyes, Diablo possessed an uncanny ability that had earned him nothing but mockery from the other residents of the San Carlos Apache Reservation. While normal pigs rooted around for scraps and wallowed in mud, Diablo would spend hours with his snout pressed to the ground, following invisible trails that led nowhere anyone could see. The tribal council members would shake their heads when they saw Joseph walking the desert with his peculiar companion, wondering why a respected elder would waste his time with such an obviously defective animal. Sarah Martinez, a young archaeologist from the University of Arizona, first heard about Diablo during her 3rd month working on a routine survey of potential historical sites across the reservation. She was documenting Native American settlements for the State Historical Society, a job that required equal parts academic rigor and diplomatic sensitivity. The Apache people had good reason to be suspicious of outsiders claiming to study their culture, given the long history of exploitation and broken promises. But Sarah had earned a measure of trust through her respectful approach and genuine interest in preserving Apache heritage rather than simply cataloging it for academic purposes. The first hook came during a scorching Tuesday afternoon in late September, when temperatures still soared above 100 degrees even as autumn officially began. Sarah was interviewing elderly tribal members about historical sites when Joseph mentioned his pig's strange behavior. "That animal knows things," the old man said, his weathered face serious despite the seemingly absurd claim. "Yesterday, Diablo led me to a place where my grandfather used to tell stories about the old days. The pig had never been there before, but he knew exactly where to go. He stood right over the spot where my grandfather said warriors used to gather before riding to battle." Sarah initially dismissed the story as folklore mixed with coincidence, but something in Joseph's manner made her reconsider. The Apache elder wasn't the type to make frivolous claims or seek attention through tall tales. His reputation for honesty and wisdom had earned him respect throughout the reservation and beyond. If Joseph Crow Feather said his pig possessed unusual abilities, perhaps it deserved investigation rather than immediate dismissal. 3 days later, Sarah witnessed Diablo's behavior firsthand when Joseph invited her to observe one of their desert walks. The pig moved with purposeful determination, his snout pressed close to the ground as he followed a path that seemed random to human observers. But there was nothing random about Diablo's movements. He would pause at specific locations, digging briefly before moving on, as if confirming invisible markers only he could detect. After 2 hours of this peculiar journey, Diablo suddenly stopped at an unremarkable patch of desert and began digging with unprecedented intensity. Joseph watched his pig with growing excitement, recognizing signs he'd learned to interpret over months of similar excursions. "He's found something big," the old man whispered to Sarah. "Look at how his ears are positioned, how his tail moves. This isn't like the other times." Sarah felt her archaeological instincts awakening despite her skepticism. She'd spent enough time on excavation sites to recognize the signs of significant discoveries, even when they came through unconventional means. The second hook dropped like a thunderbolt when Diablo's digging revealed the edge of something metallic buried 3 feet beneath the desert floor. Sarah's heart began racing as she realized they might have stumbled upon something genuinely significant. Using proper archaeological techniques, she carefully expanded the pig's initial excavation, documenting each layer of soil and photographing everything in meticulous detail. What emerged from the ground defied every expectation and challenged everything she thought she knew about Apache history. The object was a Spanish conquistador's helmet, but not just any helmet. This was a morion, a distinctive peaked helmet worn by officers in the Spanish colonial forces, crafted from steel that showed minimal corrosion despite centuries underground. But the truly extraordinary discovery lay in the helmet's interior, where a carefully wrapped bundle of documents had been preserved by the dry desert conditions. Sarah's hands trembled as she realized she was potentially holding historical records that could rewrite the accepted narrative of Spanish exploration in the American Southwest. The documents, written in archaic Spanish on parchment that had somehow survived the passage of centuries, told an incredible story of a small Spanish expedition that had ventured far beyond their officially recorded territories. Led by a captain named Diego Vázquez de Coronado, a distant relative of the famous explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, this group had apparently established secret contact with Apache tribes in the 1580s, decades before historians believed such interactions had occurred. But the documents revealed something even more extraordinary. According to the captain's journal, the Spanish had not come as conquerors but as refugees, fleeing from internal conflicts within the colonial administration. They had sought sanctuary with the Apache people, offering their knowledge of European military techniques in exchange for protection and the right to remain in tribal territory. The arrangement had apparently lasted for several years, creating an unprecedented period of cooperation between Spanish colonists and Native Americans. Joseph studied the documents with growing amazement, recognizing place names and geographical descriptions that matched locations throughout the reservation. My grandfather's grandfather used to tell stories about the metal men who came not to fight but to hide, he said, his voice filled with wonder. We always thought they were just legends, stories told to children, but this proves they were real history passed down through oral tradition. Sarah realized she was dealing with a discovery that could revolutionize understanding of early Spanish-Apache relations. The accepted historical narrative suggested that contact between Spanish explorers and Apache tribes had been uniformly hostile, characterized by violence and mutual distrust. But these documents painted a picture of cooperation, cultural exchange, and mutual respect that challenged fundamental assumptions about colonial period interactions. The documents described Apache warriors learning Spanish military formations while Spanish soldiers adopted Native American survival techniques perfectly suited to desert environments. There were detailed accounts of joint hunting expeditions, shared ceremonies, and even intermarriage between Spanish colonists and Apache women. Most significantly, the journal described the creation of a hidden cache containing Spanish weapons, tools, and additional historical records, buried in a location marked by distinctive rock formations. Diablo, seemingly sensing the importance of his discovery, became increasingly agitated as Sarah and Joseph examined the documents. The pig paced in circles around the excavation site, snorting and pawing at the ground as if trying to communicate something urgent. Joseph watched his animal companion with growing understanding, recognizing signs that had preceded previous significant discoveries. He knows there's more, Joseph said confidently. Diablo's telling us this is just the beginning. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and professional caution as she contemplated the implications. If the pig had indeed located additional historical artifacts, they could be dealing with one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in southwestern United States history. The following morning, Sarah returned with proper archaeological equipment borrowed from the university, including metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and precise excavation tools. Joseph arrived with Diablo, who immediately began displaying the same agitated behavior that had preceded the helmet discovery. The pig seemed to understand that this was important work, staying close to the human investigators while maintaining his intense focus on the ground. Sarah's metal detector immediately began registering multiple hits across a wide area surrounding the original discovery site. The readings suggested a large cache of metallic objects buried in an organized pattern, exactly as described in Captain Vázquez de Coronado's journal. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of numerous buried objects arranged in what appeared to be a systematic storage configuration. The excavation that followed revealed treasures beyond Sarah's wildest archaeological dreams. Buried in carefully constructed stone chambers were Spanish weapons including swords, daggers, and early firearms, all wrapped in oiled leather that had preserved them in remarkable condition. There were tools, religious artifacts, and personal items that provided intimate glimpses into the daily lives of Spanish colonists living among Apache people. But the most extraordinary discovery was a second cache of documents, far more extensive than the first batch found in the helmet. These papers included detailed maps of the region, complete with Spanish and Apache place names, descriptions of natural resources, and accounts of diplomatic negotiations between Spanish leaders and Apache chiefs. There were trade agreements, military alliances, and even what appeared to be an early version of a mutual defense pact. Joseph studied the maps with growing excitement, recognizing landmarks and locations that held special significance in Apache oral history. This place here, he pointed to a marking on one of the Spanish maps. This is where my people say the Great Peace Council was held generations ago, and this location matches where our stories say Spanish metal workers taught Apache smiths new techniques. Sarah realized they had uncovered evidence of a lost chapter in American history, a period of successful cooperation between European colonists and Native Americans that had been forgotten by official records. The implications were staggering, suggesting that peaceful coexistence between vastly different cultures was not only possible but had actually occurred for significant periods. The documents revealed that the Spanish-Apache alliance had lasted for nearly a decade before being disrupted by the arrival of a larger Spanish force sent to establish more aggressive colonial control. Captain Vasquez de Coronado and his men had been given a choice: abandon their Apache allies and rejoin the official colonial effort, or face charges of treason and abandonment of duty. According to the journal, most of the Spanish colonists chose loyalty to their Apache friends over allegiance to distant Spanish authorities. They had integrated so completely into tribal society that they considered themselves more Apache than Spanish. But the approaching colonial force left them no choice but to hide evidence of their cooperation and disperse to avoid bringing conflict to their adopted people. The final entries in Captain Vasquez de Coronado's journal described the painful process of saying goodbye to Apache families who had become their own. Spanish men married to Apache women faced the agonizing choice of abandoning their families or living as permanent fugitives from colonial law. Many chose to disappear entirely into Apache society, adopting native names and customs while their Spanish identities were forgotten by history. Diablo's role in uncovering this lost history became increasingly apparent as the excavation continued. The pig possessed an uncanny ability to locate buried artifacts that even sophisticated equipment missed. He would position himself over specific locations and refuse to move until investigators examined the ground beneath him. Every single spot Diablo identified contained significant historical artifacts. Joseph began to suspect that Diablo's abilities were connected to something deeper than simple animal instinct. Apache oral tradition included stories of animals that served as guides between the physical and spiritual worlds, creatures that could sense echoes of past events embedded in the landscape itself. Perhaps Diablo was one of these legendary guide animals, sent to help recover important history at exactly the right moment. Sarah's academic career was transformed by the discovery. Her preliminary report to the University of Arizona generated immediate international interest from historians, archaeologists, and Native American studies scholars. The implications of finding evidence of successful Spanish-Apache cooperation challenged fundamental assumptions about colonial period relations and offered new models for understanding cultural interaction. But the discovery also created complications. News of the cache attracted unwanted attention from treasure hunters, amateur archaeologists, and government agencies interested in claiming jurisdiction over the site. Sarah found herself navigating complex legal and ethical issues surrounding Native American cultural property rights, Spanish colonial claims, and academic research protocols. Joseph, meanwhile, faced pressure from tribal council members who worried about outsiders exploiting Apache heritage for profit or academic advancement. Some community leaders questioned whether the discovery should be shared with the outside world at all, given the long history of broken promises and cultural appropriation by non-native researchers. The situation became more complex when DNA analysis of artifacts suggested that some of the Spanish colonists had indeed integrated permanently into Apache bloodlines. Several tribal members discovered they had Spanish ancestry dating to the 16th century, adding personal stakes to questions about how the discovery should be handled and interpreted. Diablo continued to play a central role in ongoing investigations. The pig's ability to locate buried artifacts remained consistent and reliable, leading to additional discoveries that expanded understanding of the Spanish-Apache alliance. Each new find added detail to the story of cooperation, showing how two very different cultures had found ways to learn from each other and create something entirely new. The archaeological site became a symbol of possibility, demonstrating that cultural differences could be sources of strength rather than inevitable conflict. Schools began bringing students to learn about the discovery, using it as an example of how history is more complex and inspiring than simple narratives of conquest and resistance suggest. Sarah's research revealed that the Spanish-Apache alliance had been deliberately erased from official records by later colonial administrators who found the story of cooperation inconvenient for their plans of territorial expansion. By acknowledging successful Native American partnerships, Spanish authorities would have been forced to consider alternative approaches to colonization that didn't involve displacement and subjugation. The cover-up had been so thorough that even Apache oral traditions had gradually transformed the historical Spanish allies into legendary figures rather than real people. Only fragments of the true story survived in ceremonial songs and place names whose original meanings had been partially forgotten over the centuries. Joseph's role as guardian of both Diablo and the discovery site took on increasing importance as public interest grew. He found himself serving as cultural interpreter, helping outsiders understand Apache perspectives on the historical findings while protecting tribal interests from exploitation. His wisdom and integrity made him an ideal bridge between academic research and community values. The pig that everyone had once considered worthless became a celebrated figure, featured in newspaper articles and documentary films about the discovery. Diablo seemed to understand his newfound fame, carrying himself with dignity while maintaining his focus on the important work of uncovering hidden history. Scientists attempted to study Diablo's unusual abilities, hoping to understand how he located buried artifacts with such precision. Various theories were proposed, from heightened sensitivity to metallic minerals to ability to detect subtle changes in soil composition caused by human activity centuries earlier. But none of the scientific explanations fully accounted for the pig's remarkable success rate. Joseph preferred the traditional Apache interpretation that some animals serve as messengers between past and present, helping humans understand lessons from history when they're most needed. Whether Diablo's abilities came from science or spirit mattered less than the important knowledge he had helped recover. The discovery fundamentally changed how historians understood Spanish colonial period, demonstrating that cooperation between European colonists and Native Americans was not only possible but had actually occurred on significant scales. Universities began revising textbooks and curricula to include examples of successful cross-cultural partnerships alongside more familiar stories of conflict and conquest. Native American communities throughout the Southwest took inspiration from the Spanish-Apache alliance, seeing it as evidence that their ancestors had been skilled diplomats and cultural innovators rather than simply victims of European expansion. The discovery provided a more empowering narrative that emphasized Native American agency and adaptability. Years later, the site remained active as both archaeological excavation and educational center. Diablo, now elderly but still sharp, continued to locate occasional artifacts missed by sophisticated equipment. His legacy as the pig who uncovered forgotten history was secure, but more importantly, his discovery had demonstrated that the most valuable knowledge often comes from unexpected sources. The partnership between Sarah and Joseph evolved into a model for respectful academic collaboration between university researchers and Native American communities. Their work showed how outside expertise could support rather than exploit indigenous knowledge, creating benefits for both academic understanding and community empowerment. The Spanish-Apache cache became one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 21st century, not because of the material wealth it contained but because of the historical knowledge it preserved. The story it told challenged assumptions, inspired new research, and offered hope that cultural differences could be sources of mutual enrichment rather than inevitable conflict. And at the center of it all remained Diablo, the pig everyone had dismissed as worthless, who had possessed the wisdom to know that some treasures are buried so deep that only the most persistent searching can bring them to light. His story became a reminder that value often lies hidden in unexpected places, waiting for someone with the patience and faith to look beyond surface appearances and discover the extraordinary possibilities that exist just beneath the ordinary world.